Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us today on the Three Martini Lunch. Chad Benson, host of the Chad Benson Show right here at the Radio America Network, is in for the vacationing Jim Garrity. We've got good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And Chad, let's start.
By the way, that lady that tends your bar also happens to be very familiar with the Chad Benson Show.
I have heard some of the intros to the various segments of your show, and yes, they sound quite similar. You know, she does a good job.
She does a great job.
She does a great job. So let's talk about really rich people and paying lots of taxes here, because that's pretty much Elizabeth Warren's plan to pay for what she admits will be $52 trillion over 10 years to get her Medicare for all into place. You've got folks on both sides of the aisle going, I don't think you can raise that kind of money just by taxing billionaires. And she's going, oh, yeah, I think we can. Well, let's hear from a billionaire. His name is Bill Gates. Perhaps you've heard of him. He's one of the co-founders of Microsoft, one of the richest men on the planet. He was speaking at I believe a New York Times event, being quizzed by a fellow from CNBC. Bill Gates was talking about what a wealth tax would mean for him, for really rich people, for incentives, and all sorts of other things. Here's what he said.
I've paid over $10 billion in taxes. I paid more than anyone in taxes. But I'm glad to have paid, if I'd had to pay $20 billion, it's fine. But, when you say I should pay $100 billion, okay, then I'm starting to do a little math about what I have left over. Sorry, I'm just kidding. So you really want the incentive system to be there, and you can go a long ways without threatening that.
Have you ever talked to Elizabeth Warren about any of this
not.
before? Would you? Would you want to?
I'm not sure how open-minded she is. Or that she'd even be willing to sit down with somebody, who has large amounts of money.
So CNBC ended up talking about this, including the same guy who was asking the questions there, and they got a response from Elizabeth Warren on Twitter and then talked about what Bill Gates' tax bill would look like.
Well, we might be brokering the peace here, because now Senator Warren says she would be willing to meet with Bill Gates. She tweeted last night, "I'm always happy to meet with people, even if we have different views. Bill Gates, if we get the chance, I'd love to explain exactly how much you'd pay under my wealth tax. I promise it's not $100 billion. Some others, by the way, have done the math. On an annual basis, it would be an additional probably $6 billion on his current wealth, depending on...
Including the capital gains piece of the wealth tax?
It might be he might be paying total of a $12 billion, but it sounds to me like he already may be paying close to $6 billion as it is on an annual basis. So it would be an additional $6 billion, give or take a couple billion here or there.
$12 billion a year in taxes, Chad, give or take $1 billion, because, who can really count at that point? So what do you make of all this?
The insanity. I went through, and the New York Times actually has a great keep it simple, stupid thing showing with these little bouncing balls what it would cost and how she goes about getting this. And one of the things that she proposes is actually capital gains, not when you exit the market and take, but on an annual basis.
Yes.
You want me to pay taxes on something I've not actually realized yet? That's insane. You know what that does for investment? Take away Bill Gates. Just look across the board. What do you think that does for investment in the marketplace? The thing I always laugh about people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and a lot of other people is they scream and yell about the people that are the wealthiest, the Wall Street people and the Bill Gateses of the world, and nobody should have that kind of money. And yet at the same time, they're the greediest of all because they want everybody else's money to pay for everybody else's things because they think it's great. At some point in time, you start adding that $12 billion up. It may not be $100 billion, but over time, it's $100 billion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if he's paying $12 billion a year in taxes, what does that take? It takes about 8-9 years to get up to $100 billion. It doesn't take long at all.
And that's exactly it. I don't think she thinks it was be $100 billion. Like, really, you think it's $100 billion the first year? No, he's looking at it, and the reality is over your 5-10-year plan, he'll be paying so much money. And I think that is a lot of what they want. They want to bleed them out till there's nothing. And we can all finally share in the misery that is the misery of socialism. And we'll never be Venezuela. I never buy into any of that stuff. But where they would like to take us is where they thought Venezuela was going to go before it went to hell in a handbasket.
That's pretty much right. And if the really rich people, and I don't know about you, Chad, I've never gotten a job from a poor person, but fairly rich people are usually the ones that create businesses, create jobs. And if you remove the incentives, and that's what Gates was talking about there, remove the incentives to keep doing what they're doing, all of a sudden, then Bernie Sanders is, or Elizabeth Warren is going to have to create somehow millions and millions of jobs in clean energy or whatever magical industry they think they're going to create to actually employ people once they kill fossil fuels and everything. And that's how ultimately the government ends up dictating everything you do.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is politicians get jobs from poor people all the time, because who do you think ends up putting them in positions of power? So in a way, no, you and I haven't, right? Somebody, I work 16, 18 hours a day. I put in my dues. I do the things that I do. You work hard. Somebody else has given us opportunities to do these things because they've worked hard and they've put their necks on the line. But politicians, no, they are employed in many cases by people who, quite frankly, are there because they want something from them. They want a better life, and they don't think they can create it themselves. So, darn it, go make it equal and fair for us.
Chad, extra question on this one. Which do you think from the Bill Gates statement is more damaging for Elizabeth Warren? The pie-in-the-sky math and how much she's going to be fleecing not just rich people, but ultimately if she really wants to pay for all this, she's going to have to tax pretty much everyone else. Or the fact that Bill Gates essentially said, I might be willing to talk to her, but I don't really think she has an open mind about much of anything.
Yeah, well, I think that's the perfect example. She said she's willing to talk, but because you're willing to talk doesn't mean you're open you're open enough to changing your mind. If somebody who's come in and become the most successful person essentially in the history of mankind, she's not going to listen, because your one vote, you're not going to persuade me to do anything. I want your money. That's what I want, and that is the reality of it, because I've got a lot of other mouths to feed, and I'm going to get it from you. And I know that if they sat down in a room for hours and he could show her that, look, it's tried everywhere else and it's failed, you're going to try it here, and what you're going to do is you're going to see a market that tumbles, you're going to see investment dry up and go elsewhere, and all for chasing something that you say everybody else has because they're greedy. You're going to find out what greed looks like.
Yeah, flexibility, compromise, common ground. Those aren't the first terms that come to mind when I think of Elizabeth Warren, or most politicians for that matter.
Or most politicians, let's be real.
Yes, exactly. So even if they do get together, don't expect a lot of new wrinkles in the Elizabeth Warren Medicare for All plan, but there is something that can be done about the actual wrinkles that some of us deal with on a daily basis. So picture your face in the mirror, or if you're not cruising down the highway right now, look in an actual mirror. Do you see all those wrinkles around your eyes? Maybe you got some crow's feet, or maybe even some large bags under the eyes. Now, let's create some happy thoughts here and imagine they're gone. Not talking about some risky, expensive surgery. I'm talking about these things being gone in just minutes. And the reason is Plexiderm, a clinically studied serum that visibly eliminates your wrinkles, crow's feet, and under eye bags in just minutes. If these are some of the issues you're dealing with, Plexiderm is the edge you've been looking for.
You don't believe it? Put it to the test, and you're going to see the results, right? You really, really were. You're not going to have to look back, and go, oh, you're going to look 10 years younger, rejuvenated. Simply put, you're going to be blown away by the results. Plexiderm can give you confidence, and you're going to need that because you're going to be looking so good. You'll need to be yourself at work or out with your friends. The best part is Plexiderm goes on clear, so nobody knows you're going to be wearing it.
But it gets even better. Go to tryplexiderm.com and use our promo code Martini for 50% off, plus an additional $10 off. That's right, 50% off, plus an additional $10 off. Come on. This offer is also available by calling 800-685-1292 and mentioning the code Martini. Plexiderm is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Visit tryplexiderm.com today. That's TRYPLEXADERM. And use the code Martini at checkout. That's tryplexiderm.com. All right, Chad, let's talk about some other issues related to the human body, not just eliminating wrinkles, but what kind of makes us unique. And that's our DNA, the DNA profile that you can't avoid. If you're a criminal or if you're trying to avoid paternity or whatever it is, DNA is used in a lot of different ways now. Solving crime, certainly one of them. But now the privacy of your DNA could very much be at risk. This is courtesy of MSN. For police officers around the country, the genetic profiles that 20 million people have uploaded to consumer DNA sites represent a tantalizing resource that could be used to solve cases both new and cold. But for years, the vast majority of the data have been off limits to investigators. The two largest sites, Ancestry.com and 23andMe, have long pledged to keep their users' genetic information private, and a smaller one, GED Match, severely restricted police access to its records this year. Last week, however, a Florida detective announced at a police convention that he had obtained a warrant to penetrate GED Match and search its full database of nearly 1 million users. Legal experts said this appeared to be the first time a judge had approved such a warrant, and that the development could have profound implications for genetic privacy. Aaron Murphy, law professor at New York University, says that's a huge game changer. The company made a decision to keep law enforcement out, and that's been overridden by a court. It's a signal that no genetic information can be safe. Chad, a lot of folks have said over the years that if you throw out your DNA to these companies, you never know for sure what's going to end up happening with it. So not only could your DNA end up being compromised, your family members who want to keep their DNA private are exposed as well, because they can pretty much link you to the family members that have used this sort of service. So what do you make of law enforcement opening potentially the Pandora's box here?
Well, it's going to be open, and it's not just DNA. I mean, if you look around, I mean, they're working on stuff like when we talk about with facial recognition and all of this stuff. The weird thing is George Orwell and the whole 1984, we've opted into everything now. We've opted into it. It's too late. Technology is at a place where it's too late, and privacy is that right there. You want to talk about the currency of the future? It's going to be privacy and trying to get off a grid. And that's going to be the toughest thing to do. And when you look at this, you knew it was a matter of time. And a lot of people thought it was fun and neat. And even companies that did this, they probably didn't think about the ramifications down the road. But they're here. And it's not just this, it's everything. Facial recognition, you name it. I'm telling you, the currency of the future is going to be privacy.
Unbelievable. So what can we do? Is it just a matter of somehow finding a way off a grid? Somebody creates a private motive for that? Or is it just a matter of coming to grips with the fact that privacy is essentially a thing of the past?
You know, I think what you're going to have to do, and I think what we're going to have to do in the future, is start to craft laws in such a way that will protect us more from things like this that's overreach. Knowing things are out there is one thing. It's now trying to prevent them, because people aren't going to want to not do something like this. Look, I had mine done. It was interesting. It was fun. I found out things I never knew. I don't want to miss out on that. But I also don't want things used against me or anybody else, and so it's going to be like a lot of things. Laws are going to come later. It's this, and that's the way it is in so many ways. We're creating things like with driverless cars. The reality is we're not set up law-wise for those kind of things. Technology and stuff like this is advancing faster than we're able to do stuff. And it's going to be, unfortunately, the lawmakers who are going to have to find ways to craft things that will protect people so you still can participate without having to say, okay, I need to live in a trailer far, far away, off the grid completely. And because we don't want that. That's nuts.
Yeah, well, it is nuts. But whenever the government sees an open door, they generally tend to not just tap it open, they tend to kick it open. And then we're relying on the government to actually restrain itself, which is not a good position to be in. But
no. And look around the country. I mean, nowadays, you know, if you say I don't want a breathalyzer, they've got courts on hand to go and get a warrant to take your blood and do I mean, there's so many things now. And that's why it's finding the right people to put in place to find protections for individuals and for groups and for everything. But know this, in so many ways, we've given up a lot of this because we want to enjoy all of these things. And because of that, we got excited about it without thinking about any other ramifications that may come down the road.
That little phone in our hands, although it's not so little anymore, depending on what version you have, that's probably stealing more of our privacy than anything that's happening with the DNA services.
I mean, they're talking about, was it Alexa right now, Greg, that may be the key witness in a murder case? I mean, here it is. We've opted into this world, and there's craziness that goes with it and some troubles and some things to be worried about, absolutely. But we're also able to get amazing things out of it. And, you know, you've got to balance it. Life has trade-offs, and what are we willing to trade off?
This is completely unrelated, but how do you cross-examine Alexa? I'd be fascinated to see how that works.
I'm not quite sure how they do that, but they're going to try to figure something out because they think Alexa may have recorded what went on, or if there was that person who did something inside of the place that night that thing happened. And so that'll be, it's not even so much about cross-examining it. Was there a person in here? Was that person this person? Did you record any of that? Because we know you're recording everything.
Yes, exactly. I guess it's kind of like the modern version of the phone call that got misinterpreted in The Fugitive, where she was calling out for her husband to help her. And, well, I don't want to give it away because it's only been out for 25 years and the TV show's only been out for 50-some. So I don't want to tell you whether Richard Kimball's guilty. But
he's not. It's a one-armed dude.
All right. Well, we won't have to worry about this for much longer, Chad, because one of the big ideas that the left is coming up with now is fewer people on the planet. So if we just knock a few off, they won't have their privacy concerns to worry about anymore. And basically, the Green New Deal is yesterday's news because, you can reorganize your economy, you can stop fossil fuels, you can end airplane travel, kill all the cows, doesn't matter. We need to have fewer people on the planet. Let's start with Bloomberg on this. More than 11,000 experts from around the world are calling for a critical addition to the main strategy of dumping fossil fuels for renewable energy. There needs to be far fewer humans on the planet. Quote, we declare with more than 11,000 scientist signatories from around the world clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency, the scientists wrote in a stark warning published Tuesday in the journal Bioscience. The scientists make specific calls for policymakers to quickly implement systemic change to energy, food, and economic policies, but they go one step further into the politically fraught territory of population control. From their actual paper now, economic and population growth are among the most important drivers of increases in CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustion. Therefore, we need bold and drastic transformation regarding economic and population policies. Still increasing by roughly 80 million people per year, or more than 200,000 per day, the world population must be stabilized and ideally gradually reduced within a framework that ensures social integrity. There are proven and effective policies that strengthen human rights while lowering fertility rates and lessening the impacts of population growth on emissions and biodiversity loss. These policies make family planning services available to all people, remove barriers to their access, and achieve full gender equity. Now, this issue has entered the political realm for 2020. A few weeks back at a climate change town hall on CNN, which I'm sure all of you watched, Bernie Sanders was asked this question by a population control activist, and he was totally on board.
Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
So, Chad, we've got a lot of more rational experts, I would argue, pointing out the fact that we're not having enough kids right now to make up for the people that are dying off. The left sees this as a good thing, and, of course, more abortion is the solution to everything.
Except for one thing they leave out. When you don't have enough to replace and you have to import, which is, in theory, what is going on, A, who's going to fight your wars? B, who's going to work to make money, to pay taxes, to care for the generation? And you can't pay for everything if there's nobody to pay for everything. And they forget those kind of things. It's the insanity of some of this stuff, the absurdity. And I sit back and I just shake my head and I think to myself, We hear it all the time. There was 500 scientists that send a letter to the UN. Most people have no idea. The same day that Greta Thunberg gave her impassioned speech about the world coming to an end, it's everybody else's fault, but, theirs. And they just said, this climate science stuff, it's and these are all climatologists and people like that. They're like, it's insane. None of you are living in a real world. There's nothing is going on that isn't part of just nature. And nobody covered it. This is what hysteria looks like. And what I get frustrated with is I'm not a climate denier. I think you can't have 7 billion people on a planet and not have some sort of effect. My thing is, I also think it's part of nature. But at the same time, what the alarmists, especially these young kids and a lot of these other people don't see is it is a political tool for them to get more power and to change things. It's not really about fixing the planet, saving more penguins. They use that as this is what's going to be my lost leader to get you in. It's like buy one, get one free.
Well, 11,000 people have signed on to this. They're scientists. They're experts. Well, this Malthusian nonsense has been spouted for centuries now about how we couldn't possibly have enough food on the planet to feed all these people, but somehow we keep feeding the vast majority of them, and if we distributed things better, we certainly have enough to feed everyone. And so when you hear the consensus on climate change is this, and now you've got 11,000 pushing this crap, it makes you wonder what the other folks who are being touted as experts are really saying.
What's funny, Greg? It's like I have yet to meet a conservative who walks around and go, hey, what'd be great is if we poison the planet and we poison the water and it was lead everywhere and that we couldn't go outside. I've yet to meet anybody ever who said that. The difference is how do we get there in a way that's better? I want to get off fossil fuels. I want stuff. Man, I scream nuclear all the time. I want a better planet. I want these animals, which most species at some point in time, and it probably will be our time at some point in time, regardless of what we do, die off. That's just the reality, and that's nature. And I always say it on my show, nature will mess you up. Mother Nature will decide when she's had enough of us. When she's done, she'll let us know. This is what nature does. That's the reality of it. And this is about politics. It's not about the actual environment. I'm not saying there are environmentalists out there that care. Absolutely they are. But the politicians who get behind it, it's about a political movement and changing far more than this. It's about using the West and the successes of the West to essentially do the things that they want to do. And I don't think they understand it. And by the way, population control, you talked about it. The West, even parts of the East, they ain't having kids. So if you're talking about population control, you better look at other places. And when you're talking about that, that's people of color. Are you going to do that? Are you going to say stuff like, no, you won't. You want to kill Whitey. Let's be honest.
Chad, it's amazing stuff. Great to have you with us, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, man. You have a good one.
You too. Chad Benson, host of the Chad Benson Show, Radio America Network. I'm Greg Corombos. Jim Garrity, again, off on vacation. Glad you were with us today in the 3 Martini Lunch. Don't forget, Plexiderm, great deal, 50% off, plus additional $10 off. Try Plexiderm.com. And tune in Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.